All right, excellent, thank you. So first I'd like to talk a little bit about Cooperative Extension and who we are. So Cooperative Extension is the outreach arm of Rutgers University. There's actually a Cooperative Extension in every state in the United States, as well as in New Jersey, there's an office for Cooperative Extension in every county in the state. And so we do a lot of education and outreach, where we talk to people about different topics related to our departments. And there are three main departments for Cooperative Extension at Rutgers. There's the Agriculture and Natural Resources, 4-H Youth Development, and Family and Community Health Sciences, which is the department I'm part of. And our funding structure is really interesting because it's a partnership between, the federal government, the state government. Did it stop sharing? It did. Oh gosh. Okay. I'm so sorry, guys.
My apologies. I hit a wrong button, I think.
Oh, okay. No worries. Can you see it now? Okay,
Yep.
great. So basically our funding is really unique because it's a partnership between the federal government, the state university, and the county government. So my salary gets paid by the USDA, Rutgers, and the county freeholders of Passaic County. So I work in Passaic County, which is Northeast New Jersey. Does anybody know what city is some of the cities that are in Passaic County? Have you heard of it? Of Passaic County? Are you from there? You put it in the chat if you want. And so we work directly with the community to work on health and wellness. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what brought me to this job. So I started as a clinical dietitian. So I went to Cook College at Rutgers to do nutrition, and I studied nutrition education there and became a registered dietitian, where I worked in the hospital, in a small community hospital in Newark. And, every time I'd see patients, we talk a little bit about, diabetes and heart disease and how to control their health. And despite everything we tried to do, I'd see the same patients coming back and over again. And so it became really apparent to me that, our education is not enough. And at the same time that was happening, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation was doing some research about how where we live matters more to our health than who we are, right? Our genetic code. And so the idea is that our zip code is more telling of our health than our genetic code, our genes. And so the idea that, the environment plays a really big part of our health was really intriguing to me. And so I did my master's in public health, and I'm trying to finish up my PhD in public health because it helped understand how the environment really affects our health. And it also looked at ways to change the environment to make sure that, people are healthy for everywhere they are, anywhere they live. And so this is kind of a model that the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation uses, called the social determinants of health. And I know it's busy, but the idea is that, there are a lot of things that affect our health. How some of the things are health behaviors, things we can control, like what we eat and when we exercise. Some of the things have to do with if we can get access to health. And then some of the things are really about education, employment, even water quality, air quality. All of those things matter to our health more than going to the doctor, which is kind of revolutionary and interesting. So since today we're talking a little bit about spoilage and waste, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about food waste in general. So food waste is, an important kind of component when we talk about sustainability. When we say something is sustainable, we think it's good for the planet, it's good for people, and it's good for profit. And so when we go through it, food waste has a lot of environmental impact, right? And so the food waste creates a greenhouse gas, like carbon dioxide, that is emitted. And if we take all of the food waste all over the world and make it its own country, food waste would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China and the United States. And wasting food doesn't only waste the food itself, but there's a lot of water, land, and labor that goes into the food. And so obviously wasting food wastes all of those things, like the fresh water, the land, and the energy that we put into it. There's a lot of money that is related to food waste, right? The Food and Agriculture Organization from the United Nations thinks that we waste about $1 trillion a year on food waste resources. And then in the US, that number is about $218 billion. And just throwing it in a landfill, we throw it in the garbage and we think it's gone, but it's not gone. Somebody has to pick that up and put it in a landfill and maintain that landfill, right? And so just by doing that, it costs about $2 billion a year just to do that. And an average family, family of four, they waste about $1,600 a year in food waste. That's like if you were taking 4 bags of groceries and leaving one of them, in the garbage. That's how much food waste we're throwing out. And then obviously there's a huge social component, right? It's not good for people. And why does it matter for people? Because so many people in the United States are living in poverty. And the USDA estimates that about 10% of people don't have enough to eat. And so if you can imagine that, us throwing away food while 1 in 4 children in the US or 1 in 10 people ended up not having food is a really big problem. And so the connecting people to the food and trying to reduce the waste is some of the work that we've been doing at the Family and Community Health Sciences Department. And I'll be presenting what we've been doing in schools, but it's not just me. Actually, Jennifer, who's the next speaker, has also been helping me and helping on the team to reduce food waste in schools. So what did we do for food waste in schools? A few of the things that we've been doing is, first of all, measuring food waste, right? Seeing how much food are we actually throwing out. After that, we've been also looking at, changing the environment. Remember I told you about the social determinants of health, right? And so what are some of the things that we can change the environment to help make sure that kids eat their fruits and vegetables and milk and, don't throw out the food that they're receiving. And so some things are like offering a variety of fruit, offering, convenient, healthy foods. And so the salad and like the convenient kind of grab and go, having a grab and go cart for breakfast, sharing the food if you end up taking it and not wanting to eat it through share tables. And so all of those things are things that we've done to reduce food waste in schools. And in general, we found that we've been able to reduce 14% of the waste from just changing the environment. And in addition to that 14%, we've been donating thousands and thousands of pounds. And so in New Brunswick Public Schools last year, we donated about 8,000 pounds of food to Elijah's Promise. And then in Patterson Public School District, where we also did this, we donated about 7,000 pounds of food last year. And so, we're working with students like yourselves on reducing food waste and what they can do to help advocate for reducing food waste in their schools. So with that, I'd like to thank you and see if you guys have any questions. And I'll stop sharing.
All right, last call for questions before we move on to Jennifer. All right, Jennifer, you're up. Thank you so much, Sara.
Thank you, Sara. And hello, everyone. My name is Jen Shukaitis, and I actually work with Sara in the same department. I work in New Brunswick in the statewide office. So I work around the state to help communities throughout New Jersey to become healthier. And let me just get my slides up here. Okay, there we go. And today I am going to be talking to you about a program that I have worked with as part of my job at Rutgers. And that program is called FoodCorps. So I'll tell you a little bit about what FoodCorps is. FoodCorps is a nonprofit organization. They are a nationwide organization, and their mission is this: together with communities, FoodCorps serves to connect kids to healthy food in school. And their vision is, we are creating a future in which all our nation's children, regardless of class, race, or geography, know what healthy food is, care where it comes from, and eat it every day. Through our work, future generations will grow up to lead healthier and more productive lives. And the reason I wanted to talk to you about FoodCorps today is because, as you hopefully heard Sara just say, our environment affects our health in really significant ways. And the schools that kids attend are a huge part of their environment. In fact, many kids spend more time at schools than they do even in their own homes. So the idea is that if we make schools healthier environments, we can actually help to make the kids that go there healthier as well. So this is where FoodCorps works, the states that are in yellow. So they work around the country in the states that are in yellow here. And so New Jersey, as you can see, is one of those states. These are some of our former FoodCorps New Jersey service members. And these are the places in New Jersey where our FoodCorps members work. So throughout the whole state, you can see where those little pin drops are. In Newark, Patterson, New Brunswick, Trenton, Atlantic City, Camden, actually we have 2 in Camden. So different schools and other nonprofit organizations that work with schools throughout the state. Excuse me. So why does FoodCorps do what they do? So these are just some numbers right now. So 1 in 3 children, American children, are categorized as being overweight or obese. We also don't give our kids in schools very much nutrition education. Only not even 3.5 hours of education in nutrition is given to children every year in school. And 1 in 2 children of color are on track to develop diabetes currently in this country. The FoodCorps program is built on the idea that schools are the most effective points of intervention, meaning that schools are where kids spend the majority of their time. And for our most vulnerable students, schools are also where they eat the majority of their calories. So there are many kids in this country who eat most of their meals, most of their calories during school hours, as opposed to anywhere else like home. Okay. Each year, there are 5 billion meals served in public schools around the country, and 30 million students currently rely on school meals for nourishment. So in other words, that means that a lot of kids really depend on getting food at schools because they may not get the food that they need to grow healthy and strong. They might not get it at school. So FoodCorps believes that every child deserves a healthy life, and yet we know that this is not actually what's happening. So right now there are 6 million children that are what we call food insecure throughout the country, meaning that they do not have reliable access to nutritious and appropriate food on a regular basis. And currently 10 million children are on track to develop diet-related diseases like type 2 diabetes. FoodCorps helps children get access to nutritious meals and food education in schools. Over 150,000 students were reached this year in the classroom, in school cafeterias, and also in school gardens, which is a big part of what FoodCorps does. So what does FoodCorps service look like? I have a lot of, I have some numbers and I also have a lot of photos. I'm gonna go through the photos quickly because I only have a few minutes. There are 3 areas of service. So in the last year alone, there were 42,000 hands-on lessons that were led by FoodCorps members, 30,000 kids who were taught for more than 10 hours, 471 learning gardens that were either created or improved upon, supported in some way. Over 3,000 taste tests conducted in school cafeterias. 20% of schools that FoodCorps members worked with introduced taste tests for the first time. And this is important because taste tests are a way to introduce kids to a new healthy food in like an easy, non-threatening way. Just say, hey, taste this and let me know if you like it. It's not like you can put a big heaping portion and say, you got to eat it. And a school-wide culture of health. So how schools are changing. FoodCorps increases community engagement, improves administrative changes, and also parental support in creating healthier environments in schools. And these are just some photos from FoodCorps service members and what they have done throughout the year. So just teaching kids about healthy foods. This is actually a share table. This is also a way to reduce food waste in cafeterias. These are some FoodCorps service members here in New Jersey and New Brunswick. We had a farmer's market at a school. This is a taste test for sweet potato hummus. More taste tests. A farmer came to the school teaching kids about where food comes from, helps them to understand it and value it more. This is one of the service projects on a farm, gleaning string beans. This was at the Department of Agriculture in New Jersey. That's the Secretary of Agriculture on the left there, Doug Fisher. More taste tests and a contest to make healthy snacks. This is kids in the garden doing yoga, teaching them about healthy foods, being funny and dressing like vegetables. So what does a FoodCorps member do? What does it look like? FoodCorps members commit to doing at least 1 year of service. You can do up to 2 years of service full time. You get a small living allowance, depending on where you live. That can vary by state. You get an education award, which is like a scholarship. You get health insurance. You get ongoing training and professional development paid for by FoodCorps, professional experience working in schools, working with kids, teaching nutrition, community organizing. And this was just in the last program year, what the impact was. So 167,000 students were taught, 500 gardens were either built or supported. There were 3,200 taste tests and 3,900 volunteers were recruited to work with FoodCorps. If you're interested in getting involved, FoodCorps members have to be 18 years old, but in the future, this is a great way for to get involved in an organization that works to address food insecurity and nutrition. And so here is the application link. And you can also follow on social media if you're interested in learning more about FoodCorps. And you can also contact me with questions, or Haley, who's the current manager for FoodCorps in New Jersey. This is our contact information. Oh, and that's Michelle Obama. FoodCorps members got to meet her at one of the service sites a couple of years ago. So I wanted to throw that up there as well. And that's it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take questions.
Jennifer, you have 2 questions in the chat box. The first one is from Caligera McCormick. Do you do food tests in the school before the school system updates their menu to add new foods or recipes?
You do food tests in the school before the school system updates their menu. Oh, so in other words, yes. So one of the goals of the taste test is to incorporate new, healthier foods into the recipes. And a lot of schools have actually done that. So I know one of our most popular recipes was some cumin roasted broccoli that actually the kids voted on and said, we want this in our lunches. So please, let's start having it.
Awesome. And then you have a question from Maya. What does the living allowance cover and what isn't covered?
The living allowance is what you're paid for the year. That's like the salary. They don't call it a salary because it's really a service position. It's only 1 or 2 years. That's just what you're paid for the year. It's not limited to what's covered, what's not. And it is full-time. Yes, it's full-time. It's a 1 year full-time commitment, or 2 if you want to do up to 2. You can re-up for one extra year.
Awesome. Any other questions for Jen before we go to Richard? All right. Well, thank you so much, Jen.
Thank you so much.
All right, Richard, you're up.
Yeah. First, I need to unmute my screen, and then I need to start the slide set. So let's see if we can get that going. Can you see it? Aha.
Yeah.
So my name's Rick VanVranken. I'm a county ag agent from Southern New Jersey. You've got a great cross section of cooperative extension here going from North Jersey to South Jersey, and in different aspects of what extension work does. Do you have a thing in the middle that shows a little bar? I'm not sure what that means. Anyway, there it is again. Move the window away. In any case, I'm move this window away from the shared application. Do any of my techie folks know what I've got messed up?
I was going to say, Richard, I do see it on your screen too. I've had it before. Sometimes if I have other applications open, such as like my Outlook, for example, but I don't know how to get.
Let me see if I can get rid of that then. Are you still seeing the,
Yeah, I would try closing it and opening it again.
we'll
Or
stop
like
the
not
share.
unsharing and then
All
resharing,
right.
if that makes a difference.
For all of our participants who are on here, this is just proof that this is live. This is incredible. We love it.
All righty, let's try that again. Share it and run it. Is that better? So again, my name is Rick VanVranken. I'm a county agricultural agent, and I came here about almost 40 years ago from upstate New York, where I grew up about a generation away from the farm. But I went to school and obtained degrees in vegetable crop production, and then moved to South Jersey, where I've had this position ever since. Some of the discussion we've been talking about, there's a lot of talk in the news about waste from the farm right through the entire food system. But I have a little bit of a contention when folks start blaming waste on the farmers, because there's so much expense involved in producing crops and livestock that if farmers wasted much, they would not be in business very long. So when I talk about marketing, a lot of people ask me, how do I market my produce? Well, my answer to them is, you don't market your produce, you need to be producing for your market. One of the big things is that when you plant a crop, if you plant too much and you're not going to be able to sell it, then you're automatically going to be wasting a whole lot of time, energy, and inputs going into that production. So we talk a lot about making sure you understand your market, and that's been a lot of the focus of the work that I've done over my years, whether it's trying to produce crops as efficiently as possible, trying to reduce the pest problems, or finding new markets and alternative markets for those crops. When we talk about the food chain from farm to plate, the farmer produces it. There are many different ways he can sell he or she can sell that product and get to the consumer. If you were to watch the media coverage of farming, you might think that all farmers sell farmer to consumer some way. They have a farm market, they do pick your own. CSAs, or community supported agriculture, is very popular these days. Or they may go to a community tailgate market to sell their products. The biggest fallacy there is that the problem is there's only about 1% of the total produce grown in this country that is sold directly to consumers by the farmer. The majority of it goes through some sort of wholesale chain, and whether it gets processed into a different form, or if it goes to the market and ends up there as a fresh, the majority of the product is sold either through a retail grocery store or through food service agencies, restaurants, hospitals, schools, as Sara had talked about, Sara and Jen had talked about. So there's lots of opportunities all along there for things to be discarded or wasted in some manner, but on the farm we try to avoid that as much as possible. So we start right from the beginning in planning for potential losses or avoiding those losses. There's lots of things that can stress a plant, whether you have so we start with a soil test before we plant to make sure that the fertilization is correct. We have to plan for irrigation, even though we've had a wet summer, a wet fall, the springtime was dry, or vice versa. So we have to be able to irrigate the crops and manage the water. Season extension is a means of planting and using techniques that allow us to grow longer than if we were to just plant outdoors and leave it. So we have greenhouses to produce early transplants. We have covered tunnels that help plant in the fields, and we can get earlier crops out of the field. There's a whole study of how to make sure, and we have recommendation manuals that we've build on every year, doing research to make sure we've got the proper plant spacing, we plant all our crops at the right depth, and that we test and know that we have the best varieties to perform in this area. So our farmers can make planting decisions very early on in the marketing process in order to make sure they're growing the right things. Then once you've got them growing, there's all kinds of issues out in the field. Weeds, insects, and diseases are the big ones, but more and more we have issues with wildlife like deer and birds that can cause damage and create unmarketable product. So all of that is talking about planning before you plant. So you have to know your market. If you just go out and grow a bunch of Scotch bonnet or habaneros thinking you're going to corner the Hispanic market, you may be in for a big surprise if you happen to be living in the middle of a community that is mostly Puerto Rican or Dominican, because even though they like the smoky flavor of a habanero, they don't like the heat. So you won't be able to sell many of those habaneros if you're in that community. So you need to really understand who you're going to sell it to. After we're done producing for the market, we need to harvest those crops, and when they're ready to go, there's a whole science in the study of post-harvest handling. And one of the main things that we do to make sure we maintain and keep the quality of the product as close to perfect as it is coming out of the field is we have to cool it down. We need to remove what we call the field heat. That slows down the respiration of the plant product, and it also slows down the growth of decay organisms. There are many different kinds of cooling systems. Some just use cold air blasted over the crop. Others use cold water or ice. And there's another system that uses vacuum cooling. And that's actually where if you draw a vacuum, water boils at a lower temperature, but it still needs heat to boil. So it takes the heat energy out of the product, cooling it down as it's removing some of that water. It's a fascinating science all of its own. But you have to make sure you have the proper system for the type of produce. Some things work better in a vacuum cooler than they do in air or water. Others need to have the water or the cold ice and won't do well in a vacuum cooler. You also need to make sure you've got the proper packaging to make sure that the packages will hold up throughout the cooling and the storage and the transportation. And you can go into packaging design if you are designing both for that strength for protection, but also the packages can't be completely closed because you have to get the air or the water through the package in order to cool it down. Once you get it cooled down, you may need to cool it, or you may need to store it for a little while on its way to the market. So there are crops that can be refrigerated. Some need only to be cooled a little bit, such as tomatoes. If you make them too cold in the refrigerator, then they're going to decay and they may not ever ripen to full flavor. So we don't recommend refrigerating tomatoes. On the other hand, there are other crops that are better off if you freeze them rather than trying to maintain the freshness. And then there's a whole nother science avenue of storage called controlled atmosphere. And this is biggest in apple crops. And they actually put them in large rooms. They remove the oxygen and CO2, carbon dioxide, and replace it with nitrogen, and also refrigerate those rooms. And that way they're able to keep apples fresh as they were coming off the tree for almost 12 or more months. That's an important aspect for maintaining quality and reducing waste on the farm. But then we can go the other direction as well. And we talk about value-added products as a means of creating more markets for the crops. Cranberries are a big one for New Jersey. And we actually, our farmers here were the people that helped start the Ocean Spray business, but it's a cooperative, it's farmer owned. And they went from selling fresh cranberries and then cranberry sauce to expanding into juice. And from juices, you can fortify them. You'll notice the one there has calcium added to it, another value added addition that makes it more valuable to the consumer, and they'll pay a little bit more. And then the latest addition to the Ocean Spray line, of course, is craisins, and that's been a popular new outlet for them. But you can see several examples of different types of value-added products. If you had milk, you could make ice cream or butter. If you have other types of crops, there are things that you can make from them. One of the things that we have with Rutgers is our Food Innovation Center. It is a what do you call it? A test kitchen that helps you develop new products. And so we've had farmers that have taken excess eggplants and created frozen products from them. We've had others that have taken the Jersey tomato, made ketchup and sauces out of them, things like that. And the Food Innovation Center was there helping them along the way. Well, if you're trying to reduce waste, one of the big things and one of the real challenges for farmers is the consumer in America is spoiled and they tend to like perfect things. And so there's been a lot of media attention about the waste of seconds and different means of selling them, like imperfect produce and other clever marketing tools. But one of my favorites is the Odd Bells. The folks there in California started packaging small, undersized, and slightly misshapen, gave them a fancy name, and they were able to move what otherwise would have had to go to a processor. So the last step, though, is before we get to trash, there is a lot of produce that is recycled. And from that, it could be in the production and harvesting side, all those misshapen, bruised or broken somehow in the harvesting and handling. It could be infested produce or just plain overproduction. They didn't plan for a market glut that year and they had too much that they couldn't sell. Post-harvest, something got stored the wrong way or cooled too far or not cooled enough, it got stored too long. And then there's always all kinds of trimmings that come off all along the production cycle. Is that trash? Well, most farmers don't put things into the trash bin because they have to pay for that to be hauled away just as much as they do anything else. So most of produce is organic matter, and that can be returned to the soil the same way any other organic matter can. So they'll typically do sheet composting, because it's just too much to set up an extra composting process. You put it on in a thin layer spread across the fields and then mix it in before the next crops go in. Alternatively, there are a few places that do windrow composting where you really manage the conversion of the wasted trimmings and crop and manage turning that into true compost. So ultimately, we don't trash too much unless it somehow got pre-packaged and spoiled within a package, and then it would cost more to open up and dump the packages than it would to just throw it in the trash. But that's few and far between on most farms. And I believe that's the end of my presentation, so we can open it up for questions and discussion.
Anyone have any questions for Rick before we go on to questions for the three in general?
Yes, the incubator kitchen, Matt. Drew a blank there.
I didn't want to stop your rhythm, but in my brain, I'm like, I think it's an incubator kitchen. I think it's an incubator kitchen.
You got it.
All right, so we have a few questions that that Serafina provided for us. She coordinates the World Food Prize Youth Institute. So we'll ask our questions to the three panelists, and whoever wants to answer, you can answer. And then as we go along, if any of our audience members or participants would like to chime in with a question, please let us know. We are happy to hear from you. We'd love to hear your questions. Okay, so the first question we have for you is, what is the community like that your work primarily, or your work or your research primarily affects?
Are we going in any particular order, or?
Whoever wants to go first.
Okay, I'll go. So I work throughout New Jersey. So I guess the community that I work with is as diverse as the population of New Jersey. However, in particular, I tend to work with, I work largely with schools, and I tend to work in areas that are underserved. And so the communities that I work with are very diverse. Both ethnically and racially and economically as well. So it's hard for me to sum up easily what the communities I work with look like, since I work with such a broad range of people. Yeah.
You work with everyone.
I do, and I like that.
So similar to Jen, I also work with a lot of different people, but for the food waste work that we've been doing, I think most of the people we talk to are usually schools. So we work a lot with administrators and food service personnel in the schools, like the cafeteria ladies and the people who come up with the menus, things like that. And then I geographically, and like I mentioned in the beginning, part of my salary is paid for by the freeholders of Passaic County. So I work mainly in Passaic County, but because there's been such an interest in food waste, we've really taken like this show on the road. And so we've been going all over the state to do these trainings and talk to different people. So I would say like our main audience when it comes to the food waste school studies, it's really schools, both the students and the cafeteria workers, as well as kind of geographically everywhere in New Jersey, not really specifically one place.
So I'm primarily assigned to and stationed here in Atlantic County, and I work primarily with commercial vegetable growers, whether they be small backyard operations up to multi-million-dollar farms that produce fresh market vegetables from early March through November. This area, we grow a lot of specialty vegetables, not just Jersey tomatoes and corn, but we have all kinds of lettuces and greens and herbs early in the spring and again late in the fall. We have a lot of eggplants in addition to peppers and the tomatoes and corn. So there's lots and lots of crops to work on, and our crops get shipped all over the east coast of the country and a lot up into Canada. So we have to keep those growers working efficiently and keep them abreast of the markets that are out there. And so one of my research areas has been in looking at ultra specialty crops such as ethnic vegetables that a lot of new immigrants might be longing from their home countries. And so that gets me out and about around the state talking and working with other growers that are trying to produce for those markets.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question, what global food security topic do you work on, and how does your research or work impact food security? Any takers?
Well, I think that what I was trying to illustrate with my talk is that on the farm side of things, trying to find alternative markets for as much of what is produced as possible to make sure that is available to the community, and making connections, whether it be through community food banks all the way up through distribution to food service places, businesses, as well as directly to consumers. Making those connections to be able to move as much as that product as possible is where my work focuses.
Yeah. And for us, I think one of the things that we've really tried to do is Rutgers a long time ago had this mantra when I was in school, so that was a really long time ago, that said, you know, think global, act local. And so I think that's what we've been really trying to kind of work on. And so, you know, we work with schools to connect them to places they can donate some of their produce, some of their, you know, healthy foods, and then also kind of work on strategies they can do in their cafeterias to reduce waste. But that, even though it's like super local, like it's on the school level or the city level, the same things are happening all over the world. And so I was invited to speak in Italy for a conference by the American University of Rome. And it was basically about, you know, how we can improve the environment related to food systems. And they, you know, asked me to speak because they wanted to see more people doing like this super local work, right? Where we're trying to reduce food insecurity, trying to improve the you know, the environment, but at the same time, like bringing it to a global scale. And so if anyone is interested in this, so the United Nations and the Food and Agriculture Organization are hosting a food systems summit, which is the first ever for the UN next year in 2021. And so the Barilla Nutrition Center for Food and Nutrition is hosting an event. I think it's actually tomorrow, so I'll send you guys the link in the chat for those who are interested. And they have 30 of the like incredible speakers all over the world speaking about food systems and how, you know, we should connect people to the food system as well as try to reduce the environmental impact of the food system. So if that's something you'd be interested in, I'm happy to share that event.
Great, thank you so much, Sara.
And I guess if I had to, well, speaking about FoodCorps, I guess if I had to sum up what issue we're addressing with that program, it would be childhood nutrition and food insecurity. But I think that really the larger goal is to not just feed kids like in, you know, in the immediate moment, but also to instill in children an understanding of food and how it affects our health, both immediately and then also long term. So the program doesn't just affect like the current nutrition state, but also hopefully will continue to have an impact throughout their lives, so into adulthood as well.
Great, thank you. So our next question comes from Calogera McCormick in the chat. How has the amount of food you are working with changed with the pandemic? And do you work more with food pantries?
So I'll start, since we work in schools and schools are closed during the pandemic, which has complicated everything for us. But basically we tend to work with schools because they serve a large number of students, and usually we work with low income schools where everyone gets like a school lunch, like free lunch. And so because of the pandemic, we've been actually just kind of working on just educating people about our program, because we can't actually go into the schools and do the audits and train people because the schools are closed. And most of those schools that we work with that generally, sorry, my daughter loves being on camera, so she's here. So they are usually, just providing the food to go for the parents and for the families, which is kind of the issue. So
I can take over for a minute.
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Sarah needs a minute. Sarah, I'll give you a minute. So, all right. It's hard to quantify, the amount of food that has changed that we're working with, but I know that FoodCorps members have really kind of had to pivot pretty hard and what they're doing. Some of the schools that they're working with are open, but a lot of them are closed. And so a lot of them have been working more closely with the food service staff as they are distributing meals to kids, because even though a lot of schools are closed, the schools are still distributing meals. Like I know in New Brunswick, they are distributing thousands of meals per week, and they are making those meals accessible to anyone, under the age of 18 in any household, not just the students who are enrolled in the schools. And so FoodCorps members have been really working on the ground to ensure that the food reaches as many people as possible. They've also had to adjust their educational approach, because they can't really be in gardens as much, really physically close to the students as much as they used to be and as much as they would like to be. So they are doing a lot of encouraging kids to eat better while they're at home, and helping kids to get easy recipes together that they can do themselves, so that it makes it easy and quick for the students, and it's not something that is overwhelming or inaccessible to the kids who are at home doing virtual learning these days.
My work evolved pretty rapidly as well when the pandemic first hit and everything shut down in March. A lot of farmers in New Jersey were watching Florida counterparts plow down fields and have no way of getting their crops that were ready to harvest at that time to the market. So they were a bit worried about whether or not they should even be planting for this season. But the markets adjusted pretty well. The food system adjusted pretty quickly for getting fresh produce back into the distribution channels and out to grocery stores. New Jersey doesn't have a lot of farmers that are contracted with processors or with food distribution or food service type operations. So our farmers were a little less impacted by the fact that a lot of restaurants and other food service establishments closed down. It did make for some interesting times. The two things that really impacted the direction of my work this past summer was, number one, all our fresh produce is pretty much hand harvested. So we have a lot of migrant laborers that come into the state every year to help with the harvest. And there was major concerns about whether or not that was a potential source for COVID outbreaks and what farmers should or could be doing to protect both their farm workers and their families and their communities. So we spent a lot of time trying to address those needs and create tools and recommendations, guidance documents for our farmers to protect their workers. The other thing is that on those farms that do direct marketing, a lot of them depend on what's called agritourism. They have festivals, they have events, they have pick your own operations. So pretty early on, we were quickly trying to develop recommendations on how you could still allow the public onto your farm, which is their major market, while protecting them and your workers and your family from the COVID-19. So it became a very interesting year very quickly, but so far we've come through it pretty well on the farmer side.
Yes, thank you. So our next question comes from the chat again. This is from Layla Bassain. She is asking, in terms of the speakers who work with schools, I was wondering if they have looked into composting at schools or teaching students about composting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that's actually a very popular thing for FoodCorps members to work on with their students. And a couple of years ago, I actually worked with a number of the FoodCorps members in New Jersey to purchase composting bins, and which I know are still at the schools that they work with. So yeah, that's because there's so much to learn from composting, and it's just a great lesson and a great thing for kids to get involved in for so many reasons, for STEM reasons, also for environmental reasons. So yeah, we work with composting a lot.
What's that song they teach the kids?
Oh, I don't know.
Dirt Made My Lunch.
Oh yeah. That's one of the Dirt Made My Lunch is actually the name of a curriculum that we use sometimes. And yeah, there is a song. I'm not going to sing it right now, but yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah,
it's actually a small world because my daughter works for FoodCorps.
Right. Yeah.
She taught me that song.
I love it.
Yeah, so we also do talk to kids about food waste, and composting is absolutely brought up, just like Jen said, because of the learning kind of benefits to it. But we try to encourage people to think about food waste in a framework that it was developed by the Environmental Protection Agency, where we use the most efficient, what's the most efficient use of all of the food waste, right? And so if it's, for example, edible food that is perfectly good, then we want to maybe feed it to people first, right? Because we talked about hunger and food insecurity and how much that is an important factor. And then if we can't feed it to people, then maybe feeding it to farm, right? Like to farm animals, right? So we at Rutgers, we actually donate or give away all of our food scraps to a pig farm in Pennsylvania, right? From the dining halls. And so that's an example of one way to reduce it from that end. And then if we can't do that, then we want to compost it. Composting is great because it brings back some of the nutrients back into the soil, but all the calories that are part of the food disappear, right? They're either, if you're using worms to compost, then the worms digest it and that's how it's being used. Or if you're using heat, then the heat that's coming out of the compost is basically the calories burning. And so the idea is that, if we can feed people with the compost instead of composting, that's the better choice. But if you're talking about food scraps and things from the back end of the kitchen that you can't, then that's definitely something we recommend for composting. And then also, we did just receive a USDA grant with the city of Patterson to develop like a pilot project of how much compost it can be produced based on how much food waste is produced in a regular school in the city, and kind of assessing that. Of course, everything's on hold because of COVID right now, but that's something we're definitely looking at for the future.
Great, thank you so much. All right, last call for questions in the chat box. I'm going to share my email address in the chat box. If you have a question and you didn't get to ask it, you can send it to me and I will pass it on. Otherwise, any closing remarks from our panelists, Jen, Rick, or Sara?
I just hope we opened up our participants' imagination to see all the different ways they could possibly get involved with the food system, because it is one of the largest employers. Even though the number of farmers and farms keep shrinking every year, the food system is huge, an important part. Everybody has to eat. So we can use your help all along the way.
Absolutely. And I always encourage people to think about, taking steps in their own lives, because you have a ripple effect, right? And so think about where your food comes from, think about what you do with food you don't eat, right? And try to reduce waste on your own personal level or your home level. And then hopefully, if you're interested in getting your school to reduce the waste, or anybody else, connect with any of us, and we're happy to help support you in that.
All right, thank you so much. A big, huge thank you to Jen, Rick, and Sara for joining us tonight. I learned a lot. I hope that our participants learned a lot as well. I think that it's a very interesting topic, and it's so cool to see how you're all coming at it from a different perspective and how it all ties together. So thank you very much, and thank you to our participants. We hope that you will join us next week. And we hope that some of you will join our food coalition for teenagers. We'll be hosting the coalition and going through the curriculum to build up to the World Food Prize Youth Institute. Usually it's held at Rutgers in the beginning of March. This year it will be virtual, but it will still be a great program, and we are looking forward to it. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you. Good night.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Florida.